In the quiet town of Grey Ridge, nestled deep in the forested hills, there stood an antique shop filled with relics from forgotten times. Among the dusty furniture, cracked porcelain, and tarnished silverware, a peculiar mirror caught the eye of anyone who entered. It was tall, with an ornate frame carved from dark wood, its intricate designs depicting twisted vines and clawed hands. The shop owner, an old man named Mr. Craven, warned customers not to touch the mirror. He claimed it was cursed, though no one took his warnings seriously. One drizzly afternoon, 16-year-old Emily stepped into the shop with her best friend Clara. They were searching for props for their school play, but the mirror's dark glass seemed to call to Emily. She stood before it, mesmerized by her reflection, which seemed not quite right. The moment she looked into it, a chill ran down her spine. "Don't buy it," Clara warned. But when Emily saw the tag marked "free to take," her curiosity overpowered her caution. She convinced herself it was just a silly old story. Emily brought the mirror home, setting it up in her room despite her mother's protests. That night, the whispers began. The first whisper came just as Emily was drifting off to sleep. It was soft, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves. At first, she thought it was the wind outside her window, but the sound grew clearer, forming faint words. "Emily, look at me." Shivering, she turned on her bedside lamp and glanced at the mirror. Her reflection stared back, but the room in the glass was slightly darker than her own. She moved closer, noticing that her reflection didn't mimic her movements perfectly. Instead, it lagged, as if watching her and then deciding to follow. By morning, Emily had convinced herself it was a trick of the light or her tired mind. But over the next few days, strange things began to happen. The whispers grew louder, and her reflection's movements became more delayed. Objects in the room began to shift positions when she wasn't looking. A chair moved an inch closer to the bed, a lamp tilted to one side. Clara came over one evening to study and noticed the change in Emily's demeanor. Her usually bubbly friend was pale and withdrawn, with dark circles under her eyes. When Clara asked about the mirror, Emily waved her off. "It's just a creepy antique," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. That night, Clara stayed over. They both fell asleep after hours of whispered conversations, but in the early hours of the morning, Clara woke to the sound of soft crying. She turned to see Emily sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at the mirror. "What's wrong?" Clara asked groggily. "She's trapped," Emily whispered. "Who's trapped?" Emily didn't respond, her eyes locked on the mirror. Clara followed her gaze and gasped. Emily's reflection wasn't sitting. It was standing, pressed against the glass, its hands splayed flat as though it were trying to push through. Panicking, Clara grabbed Emily's arm and tried to pull her away from the mirror, but Emily didn't budge. Her reflection's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Instead, a voice filled the room, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. "One must take my place." Clara screamed and yanked Emily away, breaking her trance. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and for a moment Clara thought she saw dozens of shadowy figures moving just beneath the glass. Emily was trembling, tears streaming down her face. "She wants me to let her out," she whispered. "She says she's been trapped for centuries." Clara shook her head. "We're getting rid of it, right now." Together, they hauled the mirror down the stairs and into the backyard. Clara grabbed a heavy rock and swung it at the glass. But instead of shattering, the mirror let out an unearthly wail. The surface twisted and cracked, revealing a dark void within. From the depths, skeletal hands clawed outward, grasping at the air. Emily screamed as one hand grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the mirror. Clara acted quickly, grabbing a nearby garden shovel and smashing it against the claw until it released its grip. The hands receded, and the mirror went silent, its surface returning to normal. The girls stared at the mirror, their breaths coming in ragged gasps. "We need to get rid of it," Clara said, her voice shaking. They dragged it to the woods behind Emily's house and buried it deep in the ground, covering it with dirt and stones. For weeks after, Emily avoided her bedroom and refused to talk about what had happened, but the whispers didn't stop. They came at night, soft and persistent, even without the mirror. And one morning, when Emily woke, a small shard of glass lay on her pillow, cold and pulsing faintly in her hand. It was then she realized the mirror was never just an object, it was a doorway, and it wasn't done with her yet.